Three little girls tried to sell roses to a millionaire. What they said next changed his life forever. Joshua Carter sat alone at a corner table on the rooftop of one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, his tie loosened, his drink of aged scotch barely touched. He looked every bit the part of a billionaire CEO, flawless suit, polished shoes, phone face down beside a portfolio of financial documents he hadn't bothered to read tonight. The skyline flickered around him, city lights competing with the last traces of sunset, but Joshua wasn't looking at them. He was thinking, as he often did, about how success had brought him everything, except what truly mattered. He had built empires, crushed competitors, and turned his last startup into a global giant, yet on nights like this, he often wondered if he'd simply constructed a taller cage for himself. Just as he reached for his glass, movement at the edge of his vision drew his attention. Three little girls, no older than 7, were approaching his table. At first, he assumed they were lost, or maybe daughters of another diner wandering from their parents, but as they came closer, he noticed they all looked remarkably alike. Each was blonde, with big blue eyes and identical white t-shirts tucked into yellow skirts. One of them held a small basket filled with red roses, the petals slightly wilted at the edges. The girl in front spoke first. Her voice was quiet but certain. "Buy some roses, sir." Joshua blinked, not out of rudeness but genuine confusion. He looked around, expecting a guardian to appear, someone guiding them from a distance. No one came. The girls stood still, looking at him with a mixture of hope and exhaustion that made his stomach twist. He leaned forward slightly and asked, "Why are you out here so late? Where are your parents?" There was hesitation in their eyes, a glance exchanged between them. Then the smallest one, the one holding the basket, whispered, "Our mom's in the hospital. We're hungry." The words hit him harder than he expected. Something raw cracked open in his chest. He was used to negotiations, to high-pressure decisions, but nothing prepared him for the quiet desperation in that child's voice. He stood up slowly and said, "Come with me. Let's get you something to eat." Inside the restaurant, the maitre d' raised an eyebrow but didn't protest when Joshua requested a booth for 4. He ordered pasta, juice, warm bread, and every dessert the girls pointed at on the menu. As they ate, they began to talk, not all at once, but in small bursts, bits of a story that slowly took shape. Their mother's name was Emily Harper. She had fallen ill and had been in the hospital for days. The bills were piling up. No relatives nearby. No one to care for them. And their father? They didn't know him. Their mom never spoke about him much, only that he lived in the city once, a long time ago. Joshua listened, barely able to keep his hands from trembling. Emily Harper. He hadn't heard that name in years, but he'd never forgotten her. Not her smile, not her laugh, not the way she walked out of his life without warning. They had only been together a few months, but something about her had stayed in his bones ever since. Now here were 3 girls who looked like her. And something in them, something he couldn't yet explain, felt hauntingly familiar. He leaned in gently and asked the oldest, "What's your mom's full name again?" She swallowed a bite of bread and answered, "Emily Harper." In that moment, time stopped. The air changed. Joshua's heart raced. He looked into their eyes and saw something terrifying and beautiful all at once. Recognition. A storm of emotion started to rise within him, but he kept it buried for now. Instead, he called for the check and stood. "We're going to see your mom," he said. The girls nodded, as if they had been waiting their entire lives for someone to say that. And Joshua, without knowing how or why, understood that this night was about to change everything he thought he knew about himself, and about the past he thought he had buried. Joshua pulled the door of the black SUV closed behind him as the girls climbed in one by one, still gripping their half-eaten cookies from the restaurant. He gave the driver the name of the hospital and told him to hurry. The car eased into the stream of city traffic, headlights cutting through the warm haze of the late evening. Joshua sat in silence for a few minutes, observing the girls. They sat shoulder to shoulder in the back seat, sharing a juice box and quietly humming a tune he didn't recognize. The oldest clutched the empty rose basket in her lap, her eyes flicking to him every so often as if trying to read his thoughts. He finally broke the silence. "Do you visit your mom every day?" The one in the middle, quieter than the others, nodded. "Only when someone watches the door. Sometimes we sneak in. They don't let us stay long." "And what about food? Where do you sleep?" The oldest replied without hesitation. "We sleep in our old building. There's a nice neighbor who lets us use her sofa, but we don't always stay. Sometimes we go back to the apartment. We take turns keeping watch." Joshua felt like the floor beneath him had tilted. These girls, tiny, bright-eyed children, were navigating a world of survival no child should have to know. And Emily, the woman he once adored, was in a hospital bed with no one fighting for her except 3 daughters she had somehow raised alone. He couldn't decide what disturbed him more, the fact that she had been forced to do it all on her own, or the idea that somewhere along the way, he might have had a place in their story and didn't know. When they arrived, the girls let him in through a side entrance. The hospital was old, overcrowded, with fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead. Nurses passed them with polite nods, assuming Joshua was just another father on a late-night visit. The oldest girl walked with determination down the corridor, as though she'd memorized every crack in the floor. She stopped outside room 314, took a breath, and turned the handle gently. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly sweet, like orange peels and plastic flowers. Emily lay sleeping, her face pale and fragile against the stiff hospital pillow. Her hands were folded on her chest, and 4 snaking down from her arm. She looked thinner than he remembered, and older, but her presence still shook him. His throat tightened as he stepped closer, unsure of what to do. Should he say her name? Should he wait? One of the girls tiptoed to the bed and gently touched her mother's hand. "Mommy," she whispered, "we brought someone." Emily stirred slowly. Her eyes fluttered open, then widened as they met his. For a moment, there was only silence. Then her lips parted. "Joshua?" He nodded. He couldn't find the words. Her voice was a whisper now, strained and weak. "Is it really you?" "I didn't know," he said, barely getting it out. "I didn't know about them. About any of it." She blinked hard, as if the weight of the moment was too much for her already fading strength. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried to find you. After you left. I didn't know how to reach you. Then I had them. And I didn't want to beg." Joshua felt as though every part of his carefully constructed world was being stripped away. The business deals, the accomplishments, the endless nights of empty success, all of it suddenly felt meaningless in the shadow of what had been lost. He reached for her hand. "Emily," he said softly, "you should never have had to do this alone." A tear slid from the corner of her eye, but she nodded. "I did what I could. They're good girls. Smart. Brave." "They are," he said, and his voice broke. "They're incredible." The girls sat quietly by the window, watching their mother and this stranger, this man who seemed to know them better than he should. One of them finally spoke. "Are you gonna be our daddy?" Joshua turned toward her. He knelt down so he was eye level. "If you'll let me," he said gently, "I'll be here every day. For all of you. From now on." None of them said anything. Instead, they moved toward him slowly and surrounded him, small arms wrapping around his neck, their weight light but their presence overwhelming. He held them all at once and closed his eyes. In that sterile, flickering hospital room, something unspoken passed between them. A silent promise was made, not with paperwork, not with words, but with heart. Emily watched from the bed, her breathing steady but shallow. She gave a small smile, the kind that carried exhaustion and relief all at once. Joshua returned it, his arms still wrapped around the three girls who had unknowingly changed everything. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next morning began far from glamorous. Joshua had spent the night in an old vinyl chair beside Emily's hospital bed, barely catching a few minutes of sleep between the beeps of machines and the murmurs of passing nurses. The girls had fallen asleep curled up on a blanket in the corner of the room, huddled together for warmth and comfort, as if they had been doing it their entire lives. When the first rays of morning filtered through the slatted blinds, casting long stripes of sunlight across the faded floor, Joshua sat forward and gently stretched his stiff shoulders. He had spent years sleeping on private jets and in five-star hotels, but never had he felt so emotionally drained, or so certain that he had been exactly where he needed to be. Emily was awake, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and pain. Her voice was soft, still weak. "You stayed," she said. He nodded and rubbed the back of his neck. "Of course I did. I'm not going anywhere." She tried to sit up but winced, so he quickly moved to help adjust her pillows. "You always were stubborn," she murmured with a small smile. "And you were always too proud to ask for help," he answered, meeting her gaze. For a moment, they just looked at each other, a strange quiet tension between them, not bitter but full of unspoken things. He finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you find me sooner?" Emily's eyes dropped to her hands. "After we broke up, I thought it was over for good. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't think you'd want to be involved. You were about to go public with the company. Everything was about your future. I didn't want to derail your life." Joshua inhaled sharply. "You had 3 daughters, Emily. My daughters. You think I wouldn't have dropped everything to be there?" "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling now. "And by the time I considered reaching out, you were gone. New address, no number. I didn't know where to start. I told myself we'd be okay. That I could handle it." He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, not just from her illness, but from years of doing everything alone. He reached across the bed and took her hand again, gently this time. "You shouldn't have had to." They sat in silence again until the door creaked open and the girls peeked inside. Their eyes lit up when they saw Joshua still there. He gave them a small smile and motioned them in. They ran over, their hair messy, faces still sleepy, but all 3 beaming with energy that only children seem to wake up with. He greeted them with hugs, and for the first time, it didn't feel strange. It felt natural. Necessary. They belonged with him, and it was no longer a thought, it was fact. Later that morning, Joshua stepped out into the hallway and made a call to his assistant, Caroline, someone who had been with him since the early days of his company. Her voice came through, calm and professional as always. "I need you to cancel the Singapore meeting," he said without preamble. There was a pause. "Are you sure, sir? That's been on the calendar for months." "I don't care," he replied. "Push it, cancel it, send someone else. I'm not leaving Chicago." She hesitated for only a second. "Understood. Do you want me to book a hotel near the hospital?" "No. I'll be staying with family." He hung up and felt the weight of that word echo in his chest. Family. A word that had never meant much to him before, but now suddenly carried more gravity than any business title or luxury property ever could. When he walked back into the room, the girls were telling Emily about their breakfast. A nurse had brought them cereal and juice, and they had devoured it like it was a holiday feast. Joshua stood by the door and watched for a moment before clearing his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. "You can't stay here forever. And the girls shouldn't be on their own again. When you're strong enough, you're coming home with me." Emily looked startled. What do you mean? I mean you're all moving in with me. I'll get you the best care. You'll have a full-time nurse, tutors for the girls, anything you need. I have more space than I'll ever use, and it's time I filled it with something real. She looked uncertain, almost overwhelmed, but then the girls cheered and ran over to hug him all at once. Their small arms wrapped around his waist, their smiles wide, and for the first time in years, Joshua felt his life beginning again, not in a conference room, but in a hospital room full of love, resilience, and second chances. 3 days later, Emily was moved to a private clinic overlooking the lake, a quiet place with soft lighting, attentive nurses, and wide windows that let in more sun than she had seen in weeks. Joshua had arranged everything, personally. Not through an assistant or a corporate account, but with his own signature, his own voice on the line with every specialist he could find. He had even gone to tour the place himself the night before, making sure it felt less like a hospital and more like a recovery home. Emily had protested at first. She hated the feeling of being taken care of, especially by someone she hadn't seen in years. But when she saw how excited the girls were to see her in a room that didn't smell of bleach or have flickering lights overhead, she didn't argue again. Joshua moved the girls into his penthouse apartment the same day. What had once been a clean, minimal space filled with glass, chrome, and silence quickly became something else entirely. Toys appeared on the floor, tiny socks lined the bathroom sink, sticky notes with childlike drawings began to collect on his refrigerator. The girls chose their own beds from catalogs Joshua gave them. One chose a loft bed with a slide, another a canopy bed draped in stars, and the youngest asked for, just a cozy one, close to the window, so I can look at the moon. He bought all three without hesitation. That first night was chaos. The girls argued over toothbrushes and bedtime songs. Someone spilled juice on the hallway rug. Joshua burned the grilled cheese. He accidentally dropped an entire bottle of bubble bath into the tub, resulting in a mountain of foam that overflowed down the hallway like a cartoon. But none of it felt wrong. It felt alive. He stood in the kitchen at 10 p.m., covered in flour from a failed attempt at pancakes, and laughed for the first time in months. Not polite laughter. Not the kind that fills boardrooms. Real, aching, head-back laughter. The kind that feels like healing. At the clinic, Emily was slowly regaining her strength. The doctor said her condition was improving, that the stress and exhaustion had taken more of a toll on her than the physical illness itself. But what truly helped was knowing the girls were safe. Every evening, Joshua brought them to visit. They piled into her bed, brought her drawings, sang her the songs they made up during the day, and updated her on everything from what color the bathwater had turned after mixing too many soaps, to how Daddy Joshua had almost set the kitchen on fire. Emily smiled more with every visit. Her eyes were brighter, her shoulders less tense. One afternoon, when the girls were out walking with a nurse, Joshua sat beside her and asked a question that had been burning inside him. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, watching the light reflect off the lake. "I wanted to. I wrote letters. So many. But I never sent them. You were building something huge. I thought telling you would be like throwing a bomb into your life. But it was never your decision to make alone," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, even though emotion pressed against his chest. "I would have done something. I would have. I know that now," she interrupted gently. "But I was scared. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be someone you regretted." He reached for her hand, not in anger but in understanding. "I never would have regretted you. Not then. Not now." Emily didn't cry, but her voice caught. "They're good girls. They deserve better than how this started." "They have better now," he said. "They have a future. And so do you." In the days that followed, Joshua rearranged his entire schedule. He declined 2 major conferences and rescheduled a product launch. His board was confused, but he no longer cared. The world he had lived in before was cold, structured, and filled with applause from strangers. The world he had now was chaotic, unpredictable, and filled with bedtime stories and crayon drawings on his paperwork. And it was infinitely better. Each day ended with 3 small heads resting on pillows, 1 woman smiling quietly from her hospital bed, and 1 man sitting at a kitchen table, learning how to love through practice instead of words. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in his life, Joshua Carter realized that real was enough. Joshua had slowly begun adjusting to his new role, but nothing could have prepared him for the deeper emotional shifts he was now experiencing. For years, his heart had been a guarded vault, sealed behind logic and responsibility, built strong enough to protect him from the pain of abandonment and regret. But now, as he walked past the open bedroom door each night and saw 3 little girls breathing peacefully in their sleep, those walls began to crumble in quiet, unexpected ways. One particular morning, he woke to the sound of laughter in the hallway. He wasn't used to waking up to sound. Normally, his penthouse was as still as a museum at dawn. But now it vibrated with life. He got up, still in his t-shirt and pajama pants, and peeked into the hall to find the girls wearing his button-down shirts like dresses, marching up and down with toothbrushes like microphones. They stopped when they saw him, momentarily frozen, then burst into uncontrollable giggles. He laughed too, rubbing his eyes. Is this the early morning fashion show I didn't RSVP for? They all ran to him at once, hugging his legs. And that's when he realized, this wasn't temporary. This wasn't some detour in his life. This was the life. That afternoon, Emily was well enough to be wheeled out to the hospital garden. The girls picked wildflowers for her while Joshua read aloud from a storybook. He wasn't very good at it. He kept changing voices mid-character, forgetting accents and accidentally skipping pages, but the girls were delighted. Emily's cheeks were flushed with color. It was the first time Joshua had seen her in real sunlight since she was admitted, and it struck him how little had changed in her face, despite everything. When the girls chased each other toward the far end of the garden, leaving them briefly alone, Emily spoke without looking at him. "You're doing more than I ever dreamed someone would." He wanted to say it was nothing, but that would have been a lie. It was everything. It was all he thought about now. "You gave me a reason to do it. All 4 of you did." She turned her face toward him, squinting from the light. "You're different, you know. Softer. Not in a weak way. Just, lighter." He wasn't sure how to respond to that. Maybe it was true. Maybe he'd been carrying too much for too long, and being with them had helped him remember how to set it down. Later that week, he began making arrangements to transition Emily home. The clinic had cleared her to leave within 10 days, provided she followed a strict recovery plan. Joshua hired a private nurse, installed special equipment in the guest room, and even had his office renovated so he could work from home more easily. His colleagues didn't question him anymore. His assistant, Caroline, simply handed him a folder and said, "Everything's covered. Focus on your girls." He nodded and smiled, more grateful than she could ever know. One night, while tucking the youngest girl, Lila, into bed, she looked up at him with tired eyes and said, "Are you gonna leave someday, like our old neighbor did?" The question pierced his chest. He sat on the edge of the bed and shook his head. "No, sweetie. I'm not going anywhere. Ever." She yawned, satisfied, and closed her eyes. That moment stayed with him long after the house went quiet. He sat alone on the couch that evening, staring out the window at the city skyline. He had once viewed that skyline as a symbol of success. Now, it looked different, just lights and glass. The real treasure, he realized, was in the rooms behind him, the drawings taped to the fridge, the soft breathing down the hall, the woman recovering just a few blocks away who had unknowingly given him back his future. Joshua understood now that he hadn't saved them. They had saved him. The day Emily returned home was filled with quiet anticipation. Joshua had spent the entire previous week transforming the guest suite into a warm, welcoming space that didn't feel like a medical recovery room. He had added soft blue curtains, a diffuser with lavender oil, a stack of her favorite books on the nightstand, and even a vintage record player with a few albums they had once listened to when they were young. He didn't want her to feel like a patient. He wanted her to feel like she belonged again. The girls were buzzing with excitement, running around the apartment in socks, taping handmade, "Welcome home, Mommy" signs to every visible surface. They had even rehearsed a little dance they planned to perform the minute she walked through the door. When the elevator finally opened and the nurse wheeled Emily into the apartment, the girls exploded into a blur of squeals, hugs, and nervous giggles. She was clearly overwhelmed, tears forming in her eyes the moment she saw the place. It wasn't just the comfort or the luxury of the penthouse, it was the fact that she could feel love in every detail. Joshua stood to the side for a moment, watching her take it all in, giving her space to breathe. When their eyes met, she mouthed, "Thank you." He simply nodded and stepped closer, helping her out of the wheelchair with a gentleness that didn't need words. Over the next few days, life shifted into a new rhythm. There were daily routines, medications, checkups, rest periods for Emily, and around them, a kind of chaos that could only come from three curious, creative children trying to adjust to a life that suddenly felt whole. Joshua worked from home, often setting up his laptop at the kitchen counter or on the floor of the playroom, never too far from where they needed him. Meetings were interrupted by snack requests, spontaneous dance parties, or cries of "Dad, look," which he always answered. At first, the term "Dad" came hesitantly, as if the girls were testing it. Then one morning, all three used it naturally, without thinking, and Joshua had to step away to collect himself in the hallway. Emily, though still recovering, began regaining her strength in small but important ways. She took short walks around the apartment with Joshua's help. She began sitting up to eat dinner with the family. She helped the girls with their drawings and crafts, smiling more, laughing softly, her voice stronger with each passing day. Sometimes, when the girls were asleep, she and Joshua would sit together on the couch and talk about everything they had missed in each other's lives. He told her about the years he had spent chasing deals and traveling the world, all the while feeling something was missing. She told him about the nights she stayed up rocking all three girls to sleep, about the fear, the loneliness, the joy, the triumphs no one ever saw. There were no accusations, no bitterness, just understanding. One night, they sat watching the city lights through the tall windows. Joshua turned to her and said, "I didn't think I'd ever get this chance. Not just to be a father, but to have you back. I know I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I am here now, and I'll never step away again." Emily looked at him with eyes that had seen too much but still carried hope. "You're here," she said, "and that's all that matters now." They didn't kiss or say anything dramatic. He simply reached out and held her hand, and in that silence, everything was said. That weekend, they took their first outing as a family. Just a walk through the park near the lake, but to the girls, it was magic. They fed ducks, picked wildflowers, and even had a small picnic with peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes. People passing by smiled, assuming they were just another happy family out enjoying the day. And they were. But for Joshua and Emily, it felt like the beginning of something deeper. Something earned. Later that night, after the girls were asleep and the apartment had quieted, Joshua sat alone at the dining table, flipping through one of the girls' drawings. It was a simple picture, 5 stick figures holding hands, a sun, a tree, and the word "home" written in big block letters. It wasn't just a drawing. It was the truth. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just successful. He was whole. And he would never take that for granted again. The household had settled into something that resembled a rhythm, though not one that could ever be described as quiet. The girls, Lila, Sophie, and Mia, had officially started attending a nearby arts-based elementary school, handpicked by Joshua for its focus on creativity and emotional development. He'd visited the school himself, sat in on classes, and spoken directly with teachers and administrators, wanting nothing but the best for the daughters he never knew he had. The mornings were now filled with hurried breakfasts, mismatched shoes, and backpack searches, while evenings were for homework help, bedtime routines, and the inevitable nightly stories that always ended with the same request, just one more page, Dad. Joshua had adjusted more than anyone could have predicted. The man who used to spend 12 hours a day in meetings now kept post-it notes on his laptop reminding him of dance recitals and class project deadlines. His once pristinely minimalist penthouse had evolved into a colorful mosaic of family life. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator. There was a fort permanently constructed in the living room. Half of his designer couch cushions had been converted into a soft landing for after-school gymnastics routines. At first, he had tried to keep some distance between the corporate world and his new life, thinking he could simply segment the two. But gradually, he came to see that the lines weren't meant to be separated anymore. He took calls with board members while braiding hair. He reviewed contracts while helping build Lego castles. He became a man capable of being both powerful and present. Meanwhile, Emily's health continued to improve. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes clearer, and she walked with steady strength now, often without the cane the nurse insisted she still keep nearby. She had started cooking again, not out of necessity, but because it gave her joy. On one Saturday morning, she made pancakes shaped like stars and moons, and all three girls declared her the best mom chef in the universe. Joshua sat at the counter watching them, and something inside him stirred, a kind of deep, aching gratitude he couldn't put into words. It wasn't just that Emily was back on her feet. It was that she was laughing again, relaxed again, part of a home again. That same week, something unexpected happened. Joshua received a call from the chair of his company's board. They wanted to offer him a prestigious industry award, Entrepreneur of the Decade. It was a big deal, accompanied by a formal gala and a televised speech. In the past, Joshua would have accepted without hesitation, already picturing the headlines. But now, he hesitated. He looked at the invitation sitting on his desk, next to a crayon drawing of a dinosaur wearing a crown, and something felt different. He no longer needed validation from strangers. Still, he agreed to attend, not because he needed the applause, but because he wanted to take his daughters and show them the world he had built, and more importantly, let them see where they came from. The night of the gala arrived. Joshua wore a classic black tuxedo, but instead of the usual sleek styling, he allowed Lila to clip a sparkly unicorn pin to his lapel, for luck. Emily wore a soft emerald gown and looked breathtakingly strong. The girls wore matching dresses and rode in the limo with eyes wide and mouths full of questions. Are there snacks at these events? Do we get to dance? Will there be fireworks? When they arrived, flashbulbs went off, but for once, Joshua wasn't walking the carpet alone. He held Emily's hand in one and rested the other on the small of Sophie's back as the girls clung to their parents and giggled nervously. Inside the ballroom, they took their seats as Joshua was called to the stage. He stood in front of a sea of polished faces, executives and investors who had once seen him as just another unstoppable machine. But now, he spoke differently. He didn't talk about profit margins or technology trends. He spoke about legacy. About what truly lasts. About the day he met 3 little girls selling roses. And about the family he never saw coming, but now would do anything to protect. There wasn't a dry eye in the room by the end of his speech. Emily stood in the audience, her hands over her mouth, while the girls clapped louder than anyone, completely unaware that they had just witnessed their father rewrite the definition of success in front of hundreds of people. When he stepped off the stage, Lila jumped into his arms and whispered, "We knew you were the best." He smiled, not for the cameras, but because he believed it now, believed that maybe, for the first time, he had become the man he was meant to be. That night, after the limo dropped them off and the dresses were traded for pajamas, Joshua stood in the hallway and listened to the muffled sound of his daughters laughing in their room. Emily came beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You looked proud up there," she said. "Because I am," he replied. "Not of the award. Of this. Of us." The hallway light flickered slightly, and as the city buzzed far below, the penthouse pulsed with quiet joy. Not the fleeting kind found in headlines or press releases, but the kind that roots itself deep, steady, and warm. And for Joshua, that made all the difference. The seasons changed quickly after the gala. Autumn rolled in with golden leaves and crisp wind, and the city took on the kind of glow that made even its busiest streets feel like a movie set. But inside Joshua's home, life slowed down in the best possible way. The girls were now fully settled into their new school, bringing home clay projects, vocabulary lists, and dramatic stories about who sat next to who at lunch. Joshua found himself learning how to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial while Emily laughed at his first few crooked attempts. He had always been a man who measured productivity in numbers and timelines, but now his calendar was filled with parent-teacher meetings, family breakfasts, and hand-drawn birthday invitations. Emily's recovery was almost complete. The doctors were astounded by how quickly she regained her strength, but Joshua suspected it had less to do with medicine and more to do with finally being safe, finally being surrounded by love, care, and stability. Some evenings, she would cook with the girls while music played softly in the background, and Joshua would sit back, watching them, never interrupting, just absorbing the rhythm of something so ordinary, yet so precious. One weekend, the family took a trip to the coast. It wasn't extravagant or exotic, just a small rented house by the ocean, some buckets for shell collecting, and a promise to put phones away for 48 hours. The girls ran along the shore for hours, their laughter echoing across the waves. Emily and Joshua walked slowly behind them, their hands brushing occasionally, talking about nothing and everything. He told her how scared he had been, terrified, in fact, that he wouldn't know how to be a father. She told him he already was one, from the moment he offered to help without knowing anything at all. That night, after the girls were asleep, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. The moon was full, lighting up the water in a soft silver glow. Joshua looked over at Emily, her face illuminated by moonlight and memory. "You know," he said quietly, "I always thought love came with drama and passion and fire. But this, what we have now, it's quiet, it's simple, and I think it's the most powerful thing I've ever felt." Emily smiled without turning. "Fire burns out. This kind of love stays." They sat there for a long time, not needing more words. When they finally went inside, Joshua checked on each of the girls, adjusting blankets, kissing foreheads, his heart completely and forever theirs. Something about those small moments, touching their hair, hearing their tiny breaths, anchored him more than any company or boardroom ever could. A few weeks later, the official adoption paperwork came through. It had taken time, patience, and many late nights reviewing documents with lawyers, but it was done. Joshua Carter was now, legally and unquestionably, the father of 3 daughters. The day he signed the final paper, he didn't call a press conference or host a dinner. He simply made chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast, sat down at the table, and said, "You're officially stuck with me forever." The girls screamed with joy, covering him in syrupy hugs and shouting about what they would call him now, Dad, Daddy, Pops, and for some reason, Captain Noodles, a nickname Lila insisted was necessary. Emily watched from across the table, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes full of tears and laughter. It was everything she had once dared to dream, now sitting right there, sticky and loud and perfect. The final moment of that chapter came unexpectedly, quietly, the way real life often does. One evening, as Joshua read a book aloud in the living room, Lila crawled into his lap mid-sentence. "Do you think we would have found you," she asked sleepily, "if we hadn't been selling roses?" He paused, heart thudding in his chest. He looked at Emily, then back at his daughter. "No," he said. "I think you found me because you were meant to." And in that moment, he realized something he hadn't been able to admit until now: everything that once felt like loss, like failure or missed chances, had actually been leading him to this. Not to success. Not to wealth. But to family. To love that didn't demand perfection, just presence. To the kind of joy that grows not from what we build, but who we build it with. And that made every step worth it. What struck me most about the ending of this story was its quiet, grounded beauty. It doesn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic twists, but instead on something far more powerful: healing through connection. The transformation of Joshua, from a closed-off, high-powered CEO to a deeply present father and partner, isn't just believable, it's necessary. And it never feels rushed or artificial. It happens through messy breakfasts, bedtime stories, hesitant conversations, and moments of silent understanding. The story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up in small hands, sticky with syrup, asking if you'll stay forever. Sometimes it's in a tired woman finally learning she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. And sometimes it's in a man who finally realizes that success without someone to share it with is just noise. The ending isn't perfect, and that's why it works. Life is never perfect. But it's hopeful. It's earned. And it leaves you believing that even the deepest loneliness can be rewritten with love, if someone's brave enough to show up and stay.